Bom dia. Good morning. Professor, just a few words in English and then we switch back to English, okay? Pessoal, bom dia. Peço desculpa pelo atraso. A gente estava esperando o pessoal entrar, mas vamos começar, né? A gente tem que pregar pontualidade também. Primeiro, agradecer a presença de todos vocês. Eu vou fazer uma introdução breve em português, então a gente vai para o inglês depois, porque a gente tem um professor visitante, tá? Além do próprio caráter internacional, né, eu acho das palestras aqui, eu acho que é interessante. Só um comunicado legal é que nós estamos transmitindo, tá, pelo canal da CAC, o FMG, no YouTube. Então, se vocês quiserem depois ter acesso à transmissão, é só procurar no YouTube pelo canal e vai estar lá, eu espero. Tá? Explicando um pouquinho sobre o evento e o motivo dessas palestras, até fevereiro desse ano, eu estava no laboratório do Dr. Parminder como um pesquisador visitante. E lá eu estava tentando aplicar alguns modelos de IA para dados animais. E lá a gente teve assim, inúmeras situações de discussão de uso de ferramentas de inteligência artificial na universidade, né? Incluindo oportunidades, limitações e questões éticas envolvidas. Tá? Mais tarde um pouquinho, agora, né, inclusive, a gente teve a oportunidade de ter o suporte da FAPEMIG e da PRPG para trazer o Parminder aqui para ficar com a gente em torno de 3 semanas como professor visitante. Tá? Então, a gente achou que seria conversando com o Ricardo, com o pessoal, a gente achou que seria uma oportunidade interessante de colocar junto, né, o professor Parminder, que ele é membro do comitê de IA da Universidade de Cornell, assim como os nossos colegas, né, do comitê aqui da UFMG. E, logicamente, nós aqui, pessoas comuns da comunidade da UFMG, para discutir um assunto que eu acho que é de crescente importância, que é a utilização de ferramentas de IA no nosso ambiente acadêmico. Tá? Então, antes de começar, só explicar mais ou menos a dinâmica aqui do nosso evento. Nós teremos 3 palestras, de em torno de 20 minutos, 30 minutos cada uma, sem tanta formalidade assim, mas, né, tentando manter aproximadamente esse tempo. E logo depois, não desmerecendo, mas talvez sendo aí a etapa que a gente mais espera, né, mais importante, um painel de discussão. Tá? Nesse painel de discussão, vocês vão ter a oportunidade de trazer perguntas, sugestões, comentários para uma mesa redonda que nós vamos montar com os 3 palestrantes. Ok? Então, tomem nota, façam perguntas, o que a gente quer é a participação de vocês. Isso que é o que interessa para a gente hoje aqui. Ok? Então, vamos começar? So, for the first presentation, I'd like to invite Professor Ricardo. Please, Professor. Ricardo Fabrino Mendonça is the chair of the Department of Political Science at Federal University of Minas Gerais, Brazil, of course, and honorary adjunct professor at the Center of Deliberative Democracy in University of Canberra. Okay. He's the president of UFMG's AI committee, and he coordinates Margin, a research group on democracy and justice, and it is a fellow of IMCT, Digital Democracy. And his interests include democratic theory, and also contentious politics and political communication. He's one of the authors of Algorithmic Institutionalism, and also one of the editors of Crisis of Democracy and Public Sphere, and of Research Methods in Deliberative Democracy, among other books and several journal publications. So please.
morning, everyone. And it is a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to organize here. Okay. Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to start by thanking Professor Rafael Venceslau for organizing this and for inviting us, and also Professor Pasminder Basram for being here at UFMG, and my colleague, Professor André Mintz, who I have had the pleasure to work with over these years. We having received information that Professor Parminder would be here, we thought it would be nice to organize something and to learn from Cornell what they're thinking in terms of how to make sense and to plan routines and patterns and standards in order of how to deal with AI in the university. So we decided to organize this in three talks, and I'll start by speaking broadly about the impact of AI in universities and some of the challenges posed by the use of AI in universities and how we're thinking about the future of universities. So very broadly, when we think about AI, and when I think about the definition of AI, and there are many technical definitions and differences in terms of how we make sense and conceive of AI, but I'm thinking of AI here as the use of algorithms to carry out activities that emulate dimensions of human intelligence. And this involves learning, reasoning, perceiving, making decisions, expressing something that might be called emotions, and solving problems. And the point is that the broad use of artificial intelligence is having impacts all over society in all sorts of ways. And AI is embedded in many dynamics and in many activities that we perform in everyday activities. So AI is deeply embedded in the way we travel through city, in the way we get to know each other and establish effective relationships, in the way that we now organize work shifts, in the way that we organize hospitals and courts and decision making. So AI is having deep impacts all over society in all sorts of ways. And when we make sense about how AI is having all these impacts in everyday life, we also have to think about how it's changing some of the socio-technical imaginaries. So how we look at things now, and we think about AI, and we think about the impacts of AI in terms of how we think about tasks, about possibilities, about how we perform activities, broadly speaking. So when we think about AI in the university, there's this mixed feelings, and very mixed feelings in different directions. So there is the fascination with the potential of AI, and there are all these benefits, and I'll talk a little bit about them. What is hoped, what can be done, the amount of research that has been accelerated by the possibilities of using AI, but there are also many fears regarding risks in terms of our everyday lives in universities. So when you think about the fascination of AI, we see AI applied to so many different sciences. AI is in the discovery of new particles, in the simulation of the evolution of proteins, in the synthesis of proteins, in genome editing, in the development of antibiotics, in the observation of astronomical phenomena, in the modeling of so many models in terms of how to do with different phenomena. There's this huge field of opportunities to develop new horizons. And the benefits are usually distributed in terms of several points. First, there's a hope of productivity increase. So we can be more productive, we can produce more science in a faster way. And for me, the best example of this is one of the experiments that simulated the evolution of proteins for 500 million years in order to develop new proteins. And this gives a glimpse of what can be done that was unthinkable in previous days. Also, if you think about the use of image recognition in order to produce diagnosis, for instance, there is a tremendous acceleration of the possibilities here. And so the increase of productivity is one of the main benefits claimed for the use of AI when we think about research mainly. There are also the possibility of large-scale variable analysis. So we're capable of analyzing more data in a quicker way in order to produce more accurate results. And if you think about my field, for instance, in public policy, you can analyze and simulate different scenarios in order to deal with more data, to be more accurate and precise in terms of the results expected from some of the deployments of technologies and models. So scenario simulation, so if you go now to Brasilia, every single ministry is trying to develop its own AI model in order to simulate scenarios and in order to develop applications. Experiment automation, and we can think about the labs in biology, for instance, and how they are all been automated, and how this has deep and severe implications to the accuracy and to the speed in which research can be developed. Observation enhancement, so we can use AI to observe and to understand things we could not perceive before, and we could not establish connections, and we could not actually look at before. Complex phenomena modeling, and we're talking about how Professor Parminder is working on that. Cost reduction, so when I think about genome editing, for instance, and the implications of CRISPR, and how AI has been used with CRISPR since 2012 at least, you can think about an enormous cost reduction in terms of how to develop experiments and in terms of how to apply it. And also the opening of new horizons. So there were research questions, and there were experiments, and there were possibilities that were unconceivable without the use of AI, that are now possible and that can be thinkable, that at least belong to the realm of the possibilities of doing research and of developing elements. So I can imagine that in your field, some of the questions that could not be raised before can now be asked and can now be developed in terms of what can be research. But if there are many benefits, and if there are many opportunities and possibilities and a hype of AI, there are also many fears. And I think that's these fears have been crossing the minds of all of us in our everyday lives as academics, as students, as faculty members, and as staff members as well. So the initial fears usually, especially when faculty members are talking about AI, is about academic integrity and plagiarism. So are students gonna cheat and write everything with AI? How are we gonna be able to keep up with the possibility of understanding if students are actually doing the work? There are obviously, so if that's the initial entry point, there are obviously deeper layers when you think about the risks of AI in our academic life. And students are not the only ones actually using AI in a non-ethical way, if it makes sense of that. But so there is plenty of research in terms of how academic writing is being deeply impacted by the use of AI, how journals are receiving a massive amount of papers that has tripled in some journals than they used to receive before AI, and how we can think about integrity broadly than plagiarism in itself, and also the question now of what plagiarism is, and how can AI be used to support writing that is not considered plagiarism. So this is one of the first fears and one of the first discussions. But when you delve deeper in terms of the fears and the impacts of AI in academic life, probably the biggest one when we look at universities and the documents being produced by different universities around the world, the second one is data protection. So we are dealing with an enormous amount of data and innovative knowledge and possibilities of actually developing technology that can be transform people's lives, and that can worth a lot of money as well. And how are we dealing with data protection? How are we dealing in terms of how we feed these systems, and what's happening with our data, what is happening with the work that students do, for instance, when, and this is not recommended, as Andrea was speaking, when faculty members feed AI with students' work in order to seek if it was plagiarized, and then end up nurturing the systems and training many different systems. But so data protection is a big issue in all sorts of ways. So there are concerns about comprehensibility and replicability. because people are actually outsourcing activities that they cannot do in their research to AI models that they cannot fully understand, and they cannot understand how the results have been produced many times. And also the replicability, since models change and results produced through certain models cannot be replicated in a different point in time by other scholars, by other researchers, and this brings implications in terms of research. There is also the fear of the legitimation of discrimination, because due to data training and due to some features of specific models, AI can naturalize and pretend, if I may say like that, that certain forms of discrimination are objective. In my own field, to make sense of that, there are two very good examples. So first one is predictive policing, how you can use data in order to organize law and order and police resources, and how, since data is produced in certain neighborhoods towards certain actors in society, how and if it's used in order to define crime and to define where crime happens, it tends to replicate this model and to legitimize and to foster one specific way of understanding crime and producing data about criminality. Probably the most famous example of this in terms of AI is the use of AI by certain hospitals in order to decide the degree of severity of certain illness. And it has been shown by a study published in Science in 2019 that there was a significant racial bias in terms of how individuals were classified. So black individuals had to be really in a more severe situation in order to receive the same classification of white individuals, due to some of the variables that were considered in the model, especially previous spending in health. So there is this risk of taking objective decisions that are actually profoundly pervaded by bias of all types. There are questions about the possibility of loss of creativity, although there's an academic debate on this, if AI can promote creativity in all sorts of ways. And we had recently a discussion with our colleagues from the School of Arts in terms of how AI can enhance creativity and how AI can trigger possibilities of investigation and understanding. But it can also have implications in terms of how creative people are and how they write, and how and also critical thinking, which was one of the main questions. So are academics actually understanding the amount of papers that they are throwing in AI systems and asking AI to synthesize and to produce short notes in terms of how they're going to make sense and use it? So can we keep up with the critical thinking that is essential to universities in this way? There's obviously the danger of hallucinations and inaccuracies, which is more known. The possibility of malicious applications. So there are certain develops of AI in one direction for really good purposes that can be used in completely different directions. And we see, for instance, all the big tech companies now claiming for the use of AI in the production of lethal autonomous weapons and changing warfare, broadly speaking, and using AI in different directions. In the environmental impact, in terms of how the amount of carbon emissions and the consumption of water necessary to train models and to use these models on an everyday basis with significant impacts, and which is very important for us, and we can see this clearly, impacts regarding sovereignty and innovation. So what happens when our knowledge is actually based in companies that we do not have full control, and that some of these companies are actually saying we might, for instance, hinder the access to certain models in order to allow the competition between different nation states. So when all our knowledge produced, the papers, the classes we give, are actually nurturing these models and being extracted in a certain way, producing knowledge and innovation in other directions we cannot fully control and we might not be fully able to use in the future. So there are all these benefits and all these risks and fears, and so what we have been trying, try to be quick here, what we have been trying to discuss, and this is the book that Rafael mentioned. So I've written a book with two colleagues, Professor Virgilio Almeida from Computer Science and Professor Fernando Filgueiras, who is now in the Ministry of Education, that discusses how algorithms can be thought of as institutions, as sets of formal and informal rules that have consequences in individual behaviors with collective implications, thus structuring action contexts and thus interacting with other institutions. So our claim is that if we make sense of institutional ecologies, institutions affect each other. And we claim that algorithms are affecting other institutions and impacting their routines, modes of operation, patterns, standards of evaluation. And so we have been developing this idea. So the book was published in 2023 by Oxford University Press, recently translated to Portuguese. And when we try to apply this to the university in itself, there are many important institutional impacts. And I'm about to conclude, but I'll just talk about some of these institutional impacts of the use of AI in universities. The first one is how rules and norms of everyday research and teaching are changing. So certain things that we would consider questionable or unconceivable are now being integrated as part of everyday work in terms of how we do research, of how we produce results, of what we are expected to develop in terms of data analysis. And I have had the chance of talking to faculty members across the university from different fields in economics, biology, physics, medicine. This is the first time with the veterinary school, and I'm very thankful for Rafael again for organizing this. But it's incredible how certain of the practices of labs have completely changed by the possibility of using AI, and so how the routines of everyday research are changing drastically, and also how some of the routines of how we deal with teaching are also changing in terms of what are the concerns of how to prepare classes, of how to check information, of how to synthesize articles and crisscross references. So these are changing drastically, and this has implications in different directions for the university. I'm personally particularly concerned with change in temporality. So AI is accelerating things quickly. We can simulate the evolution of a protein for 500 million years. Things that would take a lot of time that can be done quickly now. And people can write quickly. People are using AI in all sorts of ways that are accelerating the time, and sometimes, and I think that's a shared feeling from the university, we have this feeling we cannot cope with this temporality. We cannot react with the speed that is necessary in order to regulate, to understand, to make sense, to take decisions. So there is a desynchronization of the temporality of the institution in itself. And we all know how long it takes to organize a commission, to understand, to make a study, to discuss among different dimensions of the university what is appropriate, to understand the specificities of different areas and fields in order to promote and to decide, for instance, for a type of regulation. And we saw this. So CNPq just published in 2026 its regulation. MEC has in the December of 2025 the Ministry of Education. So it's all delayed in a certain way, and we are all lagging behind, running after something we cannot catch. And this is related to the desynchronization of temporality, and we all have these question marks. Is this allowed? What does the university think? And what does my field think? And we are all in these desynchronized temporalities that are running across the university. There are also concerns about actor engagement and things we use to consider relevant, and we would put energy and effort, and we would cherish in terms of our activities, are now can now be done so easily that we may just disengage. And this is one of the problems for students, if you think. So some of the tasks that are necessary for the education and for the training and for to understand the future steps in terms of a profession now can seem meaningless, and people are not willing to put effort on them. And this has also implications if you think about the university. And lastly, the construction of epistemic authority. And we are all facing this. So there are question marks, big question marks. Are universities still so central in terms of the construction of the epistemic authority? Are faculty members and professors so central in the way that epistemic authority is constructed and legitimized nowadays? So our students are checking in real time if what we're saying is accurate and precise, and sometimes raising questions through the use of different LLMs in classroom, and supervision, sometimes asking LLMs before talking to supervisors, and in society as well. So if journalists would often go to universities to ask questions as the center of epistemic authority, they're now asking to AI, broadly speaking, and this changes the way that broadly we think in social terms about the role of universities and what is expected from universities and what kinds of answers universities can address. I had prepared another one, but further developing some of these implications, but we started a bit late, so I'll leave it here and pass the floor to André, who's going to talk about what we have been thinking in the AI committee so far. So thank you for your attention. I'll just put his slides on.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, for your brilliant presentation. So inspiring. Now we have our second presentation. André Mitz is an assistant professor in the Department of Social Communication here at UFMG, working in the field of digital media, and he's a researcher with REAST, the Social Technical Network Study Group, and holds a PhD in Social Communication from UFMG and a Master of Arts in Media Arts Cultures from Aalborg University. His researching and teaching breeds media studies, digital methods, science and technology studies, and visual arts. He's a member of the UFMG's AI committee. Please, André.
Okay, thank you, Rafael, and thank you also for introduction by Ricardo, Fabrino, Professor Ricardo, and also it's a pleasure to be here with Professor Parminder and everyone. So I'm going to talk about what we've been doing at the UFMG AI Committee. So I've been part of it, of the permanent standing committee since the beginning in August, September 2024. And so I'm going to briefly present what the committee has been doing, and also some of the recommendations, some of the concerns that we've been addressing. So just briefly the timeline, right? So in November 23, the initial committee was established. It was, so the rector's office appointed seven faculty members, so from different departments, and they were led by Professor Virgilio Almeida from the Computer Science Department, with the goal to evaluate the academic use of AI tools and to sketch the initial recommendations for the institution. So, and one of the key recommendations was the formation of a permanent body to discuss and continuously assess what we should do about it, right? So, and then in 24, this standing committee was formed, and it was with members of different faculties of university to provide these transversal guidance across the different activities of the university, and also to conduct other activities that were thought to be important in relation to training of the community, and just fostering debate and discussion about the main topics related to AI use in academic context. And then the initial committee guidelines, they were approved by the UFMG Council for Teaching, Research and Extension. And one baseline premise of the committee was not to focus on strict prohibitive regulations, deeming them to be probably ineffective, especially when well, we didn't know yet how much it was already being used in the university. We didn't know also how different fields of knowledge understand what is acceptable or not. So understanding that just a central determination of what is allowed or not would not be effective. So the focus of the committee is in a framework for responsible AI use, right? So on different principles and concerns related to moral, social, and environmental questions. And so the main values that were put forward by the initial committee were transparency, which is related to how we disclose our use of AI in different activities, but also, of course, there is the always a contradiction in relation to how transparent the very tools that we use are, but we have this understanding that in any case, if they're being used, if we're engaging with these technologies, we need to disclose that, and we need to be transparent about the concerns, about the doubts that we have about their effects. There's also, as Professor Ricardo already mentioned, the concerns about privacy and data protection, because when we're using commercial and proprietary tools, and then we're sharing data through the prompts, through the attached files, how that data is being protected, and how, and whether or not it can be an output for a separate consult to those tools. And then there's the question of fairness, which is also related to something that Professor Ricardo already mentioned in relation to the biases and injustice that is very often naturalized, objectified by such tools, and how we can minimize these kinds of issues. So, based on those principles, the committee formed a few initial guidelines for AI in each of the different activities that we do in university. And those are present in the recommendations file that you can find in the AI committee website. I'll put the link later on in a different slide. And we are working on detailing of those guidelines. It's an ongoing process. So for teaching, a basic idea is that teachers should establish clear rules for incorporating AI in academic work in their disciplines. So understanding that different fields and different areas of knowledge will have different understandings on what is acceptable or not, and also considering that AI might be incorporated critically in some kind of discipline. So it's important that at each activity the teachers establish those rules and address them in the syllabi and in activity descriptions, in whatever form of communication that to the students. And it's also important that the course plans encourage discussions about AI use. So, and understanding also that it's a changing context. I mean, the technology and the kind of features that they have changes every day. And it's important that in each area of activity and of knowledge, we discuss how that impacts what we're doing and how that might impact professional activity after graduation, including the positive and negative aspects of these technologies, of course. And that courses in general should approach these controversial and problematic issues related to AI use, which is specific for each field, but might include copyright, discriminatory algorithmic bias, privacy, digital exclusion, and disinformation, for instance. And this is something that should be incorporated into the subjects that we teach and that we discuss, because it's already part of the world that we live in. With regards to research, there's something that Professor Ricardo also mentioned that should be included in our discussions, because CNPq, which is the National Council for Research, has published their regulations on academic integrity and research, and that, of course, impacts all research done in the country. So that also becomes kind of an overarching regulation that impacts our understanding here. But our guidelines are actually very much in line with the main aspects of that regulation. So that we should maintain transparency regarding AI usage and reflect on its limitations and implications. So it's part of the limitation of whatever research that we do, just as any other methodological approach that we incorporate into research. And also the human oversight. So we should be careful, provide careful oversight of whatever results that are generated through these tools to prevent this inclusion of misleading information. So we're all the time that we use AI, we should validate it, because we remain responsible for whatever results that we get from those tools. So it's not something that we can just outsource, right, to those models. There is the idea of citing AI tools as a source of information when that's applicable. Of course, that is very much something that has to be done very carefully if we're using AI as a source of information. The general recommendation is using AI maybe to find, when we're doing that, to find actual sources or to find other sources, not to use the output as the actual information that we're going to use. But when we're doing consults, even if for finding other sources of information, it's important to mention that as part of the transparency and disclosure. And then the research community should also stimulate the debate about this use of AI in research, which is of course, as I already mentioned, different for every different discipline and area of research and knowledge that we work on. About AI in extension or in outreach, that's a case that, of course, when university deals with external communities and with applied work with several communities in different contexts. And so the social risks of that should also be specially evaluated, because we're dealing, of course, with people from outside the academic community, which of course would be subject to those risks. And then disclosure is also important, describing the activities in which the AI was used in the reports and articles that are also outputs of those activities. And then also the university community should stimulate debates regarding the potentials and limitations of AI in such activities. And also there's an interest of promoting specific outreach activities focused on the responsible use of AI. Thinking of how in the university we've been debating this and we've been testing it, and how AI has become, of course, pervasive in all different aspects of social life. The university might have an important role in promoting that debate and to actually providing some activities regarding literacy and critical use in basic education and other areas in which university extension works in. Regarding AI and administration, and then of course there are some regulations about that coming from the federal government as well. There are many different concerns which of course relate to how AI might impact those administrative activities. Of course, the transparency is also an important aspect of that, but also data protection, as administration constantly deals with sensitive data. The human oversight is, of course, also important about this. And then, especially in this case, the use of proprietary models with non-transparent operations, especially when dealing with decision-making processes within the administration, is something that has to be, we have to be concerned about. And then there's a part of AI training for faculty and staff, which is something that the committee has also made some recommendations about. And there's the idea of preparing members to engage positively, critically, and ethically with AI data systems in teaching activity and otherwise. And conducting seminars and events, such as this one, for many different audiences regarding the use of AI in academic space, so to provide the discussion that we need and to spread the recommendations and the critical knowledge that's been accumulating the past few years. And also stimulate AI literacy activities for broad dissemination across the community. And then there was the governance recommendations. One was the establishing of the standing committee that I've been a member of, and using these dialogic participative processes for constructing the AI policy, and also to periodically review and update this policy according to evolving contexts and technologies. As part of this dialogic process, the committee has conducted in the past year consult with the UFMG community. It was an open survey for all the community, for which we got around 2,200 responses from students, faculty, and staff, which provided a comprehensive AI usage overview. And you can find also this report in the website, and here is the link that I promised before. And a few key insights that we were able to get from this consult. We had a majority of respondents, so 1,800 of the 2,200 respondents, they declared making use of AI in different academic or administrative activities in UFMG, with a higher rate among students, followed by faculty and technical administrative staff. So this is something that was aligned with our what we thought would be the case, that we had a majority of the community already using AI. And I just pulled out a couple of insights more detailed than that, and then we can discuss them later on. So one is the different activities that was, and these are the main activities conducted with the use of AI in the case of always or often, right? So the most frequent ones. And there's a comparison between students, technical administrative staff, and faculty. What we find in the intersection of the three is data and information retrieval, text revision, and researching for sources and links. And then in faculty, we found more often academic text writing and creation. In students and faculty, we found translation, as we can see. In the intersection of staff and students, we find summarizing text and documents as more frequent. And in the staff, we found the administrative text writing and creation as also very common. And a second result that I wanted to get from the consult is the expectation or the opinion of the community on what the role of the AI committee should be. And there we find that most of the respondents, or not most of the respondents, but the most selected option was that the university should define what is allowed and what is forbidden, besides providing recommendations and good practices for using these technologies. And those, followed by those that find that we should provide only recommendations and good practices without creating rules or limitations. And then not so many the understanding that there's not the need for a dedicated committee or to establish anything in relation to that. I find this interesting because it's different expectations that we may find, and also this, I think this reflects a general feeling of, of lacking reference of what, it's the kind of question that students often have, like, should I or can I not use this? Is this allowed or not? But also faculty, also staff, right? I mean, there is, in a way, I think we see that, and maybe you have perceived that in different contexts, like classroom context, for instance, this kind of almost a forbidden topic even, right? I mean, students that use it and then say they do not, or faculty as well, because there is kind of, it's a sensitive topic. I mean, we know that it creates some kind of controversial debates, and there's some self-censorship in debating this as well. And I think this is reflected here in this perception of the need of allowed and forbidden rules. Although coming from this perspective that, I mean, when it comes to academic integrity, for instance, of course, now we have the CNPq rules, but many of that is already kind of, I mean, we understand at some points, I mean, there is some understanding of when it has gone too far. I mean, of course, when exceptions come out, we always should discuss it and debate it, because there are, of course, some gray areas in that. But there is, I mean, some of the rules, they already cover for some of that. But I think, especially in the changing context, this is something of the some of the main interesting things to debate. I mean, it's about really coming down to principles and general recommendations and good practices might be more productive. I still think that, and that's something, of course, open for debate. Yeah, that's it. I'll pass then for Professor Parminde and continue it later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, André. I could bet this is the first time some of us are getting in touch with the committee. So it's very important to us to know there are some people out there thinking carefully about this topic. So now we have our third presentation. Parminder Barshan is a medical physicist from the University of Calgary, Canada. He's an associate professor at Cornell University, College of Veterinary Medicine. His lab, the Veterinary Artificial Intelligence in Diagnostic Imaging and Radiotherapy, focuses on medical image processing and analysis, as well as medical training and education. His medical image processing projects include the use of machine learning in veterinary medicine. His education-related projects include using game technologies in medical education and developing open access education content in low to middle income countries. Please, Professor Parminde.
I'd like to thank the first two speakers for making my job here today much easier, given their excellent presentations. And there are many similar themes from what you will hear in my talk that was presented earlier. And so based on this, I'm going to probably skim over things a little bit quicker to keep things interesting. Excellent. So thanks again, Dr. Raphael, for the invitation here. It's wonderful to see so many students and faculty here today, and thank you for your wonderful presentations and really making my job easier, because what you will hear today is very similar to what you have heard. I want to make a quick disclaimer that these are my personal opinions. They are not official opinions of the university, and they're not official positions of the colleges within the university. I also started putting this, I also disclaimed that much of this talk, some of the content in here was actually generated using large language models, and I use it regularly. I view it and use it very cautiously. But these are large language models that are typically within a confined environment. They're not public, so I am not in feeding Claude or Anthropic's models or providing them with my training data sets. I also started putting this little disclaimer on all of my talks, which is effectively saying that we really have to think as professors and students about what is real and what is authentic and what is the provenance of what we're describing for you in here today. This talk that I'm presenting could readily be ingested into a large language model for training. And what I'm going to disclose is that generally I don't approve of this. But so that is all I can really do. I can't put anything else to prevent you from doing it. But if you want a copy of my slides, please come speak with me and I'm happy to share them with you. I want to share a little bit about what Cornell University is. So Cornell is located in that little spot right there. If you know New York State, is a university that is in the middle. It is one of several Ivy League schools within the Ivy League component. Cornell University is a unique institution in the sense that it is not a private institution. It is also, it's a combination of a private institution and a public institution. And so there are students that enroll in colleges that are in the private portion of the university, and then there are students that are in a public portion. Tuition is actually dramatically different for students that are in the private versus the public. And the reason I bring this up is that the mandate of the university itself is very complex. All of the Ivy League schools are private universities, and so they have a different framework for them to be thinking about how to use their AI. But when it comes to our university at Cornell, we have a very active engagement process of outreach. We have many portions of our college that are actively involved in outreach to farmers, to the community, educating people on how in the dairy industry to the agriculture industry. And so because of this, we have to think very carefully about how we deploy AI within all of the sectors because of each of our colleges having so many different functions. The mission of the university itself is intended to be quite noble in the sense that it was founded in the early sort of mid-1800s. And the general idea was that someone wanted to create this university for any student and any study. And that still remains today. We have colleges that are in law, in computing science, in industrial design, in veterinary medicine, agriculture and life sciences, biomedical engineering, and the list goes on. I joke about the population of Ithaca as being about 70,000 people generally, but when you take away the students, it's about 30,000 people. And so there's actually a celebration when the students leave campus in Ithaca for people that actually live there. The campuses themselves are numerous. There is a large campus which is in Ithaca, but there are additional campuses in New York City, in what's called Cornell Tech. There are satellite campuses in Geneva which are focusing on agriculture, and a variety of, and there's of course the Weill Cornell Medical System, which is in New York City, a large university hospital. Okay. We've already talked about what AI is, and what I'd like to do is do a quick summary of this, but the general idea is that it's taking some kind of data that has no feeling nor emotions, and then generating patterns from that data. And then with those patterns, there is some kind of output which makes sense to us as humans, and it is engineered to make sense to us as humans so that we can potentially extract some information from that data. Often because of all of the reasons that were explained earlier, the data is complex often, is difficult to disentangle, and we can leverage machine learning and AI technologies to try to extract information from the data. And then it is the human that extracts knowledge and potentially wisdom from the outputs of that information, where there may be some judgments made. And so this is the sort of paradigm that I think of when it comes to AI. And in the sense that AI can produce plausible outputs, but it doesn't own the truth, it has no responsibility, nor does it exercise any professional judgment. And this is a critical component for a university to think about, especially if we are training people like physicians, lawyers, and veterinarians. Here's my blunt thesis for this entire presentation, is that AI is useful enough to change universities, and it's unreliable enough to damage them. And I think that there is a narrow, very cynical debate about AI just impacting students and cheating and so forth. This is not really the problem. This is what we are faced with is a broad institutional assault. And our challenge is being able to try to respond to these assaults. And so I think of this as not being simply a single event for a university to respond to, but an infrastructural event. And that we have to think of AI in the same way that we think of, for example, people in the institution, the same way we think about expensive technologies, space. AI is in the realm of the impacts on the university. And as was mentioned earlier very eloquently, we can think of these things in sort of 3 dimensions. We can think about the impacts it has in the classroom, think about the impacts it has in laboratories and research spaces, from dry labs to wet labs. In the public interface that we had talked about, again, UFMG has a very large extension responsibility. And so there's a relationship between the faculty and the public, and how the public views the university. And then there is the which I think is an undervalued component of AI, which is the enterprise of the university itself, in the way that we do our finances, in the way that we comply with regulatory agencies. Large universities like UFMG probably have lots of paperwork that they have to conduct with universities or with regulatory agencies and so forth. And the whole process of admitting students and making sure that they can go through the academic process. So I'm going to break these down to sort of these 4 different elements and briefly describe, really touch on some of the points that were mentioned earlier about some of the challenges and some of the potential advantages. And then at the end of this talk, I'll talk about the specific things that the Cornell University is doing to address each of these 4 domains. It's clear that when it comes to AI in students, this is not simply a tale about lazy students or lazy professors. It is a very much deeper issue that is related to integrity and learning assessment. And what I would argue is that the tools that we are using for our learning assessments are probably no longer useful. We have to come up with different ways of evaluating competency given the impacts of artificial intelligence. The failure modes are pretty wild because we are looking at a time and space now where the AI that is produced is extremely convincing that it is purely published, published work, very polished, I mean. And the problem isn't that the students have the access to the tools. The problem is that these AI tools can hinder or hide the absence of thinking, right? And so this is the essential challenge, because the last thing we want is to have students that are effectively throwing slop at each other, right? This is what we are afraid of with our graduating students. The core educational risk is what I would call counterfeit competence, generating people from a university that have this counterfeit competence. And again, it's because that these systems that are developed today can be very convincing and very authoritative in the way that you read them. And I would argue that using AI detection methods is actually a weak foundation for student involvement and engagement. Simply using some tool to detect whether a student has used AI in their development of a manuscript is probably not really getting at the heart of the problem. And so because of this, I think that we have to, again, really rethink the way that we evaluate competence. This is a very interesting book if you haven't read it. It's by Salman Khan. Anybody know the Khan Academy? Hands up? Yep. So he wrote this really interesting book about the future of education. And it is very, I would say, overly optimistic, but it is a very optimistic perspective. where he talks about some very interesting ideas for how AI can really democratize access to education and improve the quality of it. So I would encourage you to take a look at that book. I'm not going to play the video. There's a lot of positive things that AI can do in relation to the students in our environment. You can create personalized tutors. Believe it or not, students are afraid of our professors. So if you can have a tutor, an AI tutor, that can speak with you, they can transmit information in a safe environment, and still achieve the educational competence, this is a good thing. There's serious issues with accessibility. Some people have language problems. UFG is a very international university. There are many students here who may not have Portuguese as their first language. And we can use AI to help with that. There's productive drafting. Some people have mental roadblocks in just starting with ideas. Sometimes those ideas can lead you down a wrong path with large language models, but you can still use these tools to help do things like code scaffolding, like to develop outlines of how you think you should tackle a scientific problem or develop code. And then there's this really interesting concept of metacognition. This is that you can create adversarial agents in your learning, things that can actually push back on your understanding of things. And this is a very powerful tool that is available. In Salman Khan's book, he talks about an AI agent being effectively like your PhD teaching assistant. And that would be a positive perspective. Our institutional response to this has been as follows, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. In that what we've done is that we've created a foundational course, which is only about 2 hours long, that all students can enroll in. And professors can request that all the students take that course. And it is basically a generative AI primer. And with that, students can have a basic understanding of what generative tools can do and what they cannot do. And then along with this, we have guidelines, as just like with UFMG, about teaching, which I'll talk about later. But the thing that I wanted to really emphasize here is the notion that we need to think more deeply about how we assess competency. And here are some of the ideas that we can use to help change the way that we do this competency. Things like more group work, more teamwork, source verification exercises, digging into primary and secondary sources, actually opening up textbooks, looking at version histories of manuscripts. So for teachers to say, send me your first draft, and then send me your second draft, and then evaluating that progress of knowledge in oral presentations, of course. The second domain that I'm going to touch upon is research, and again, a lot of the themes have been discussed already. Researchers are under tremendous pressure today to publish and fund their work and translate and communicate that work. And AI can help, but can also, as was mentioned, industrialize bad scholarship. Here is an example of this. These are multiple examples of this where we see this problem surfacing. And when we see articles like this, we think, oh no, people are doing, this is really bad in AI. But what I would argue is that AI did not invent this problem, right? This was a problem that already existed. And what AI is doing is it's amplifying this problem. There are always going to be bad actors in any environment. And when we're put under pressure to do publications and to get grants, that pressure people will look for shortcuts. And it's the same people that, that do bad things with their publications that will leverage AI to do potentially bad things as well. So this is a problem that's always been here. AI just makes it worse. Other domains of where we see challenges within the scientific realm as follows: fake evidence. Large language models fabricate citations, and they can fabricate methodological approaches. There's this real underlying problem of paper inflation. Researchers here understand that the publication enterprise itself already is potentially flawed. And so this AI is really just supercharging this publication enterprise. This was mentioned earlier about biases and how biases can trickle into science. And so this word phrase that I came across is called bias recycling, where if you have a certain concept or idea and which has been generated from a large language model, which actually contains some bias, and then you take that information and then publish that work, it becomes entrenched into the scientific domain. And then from that, it can trickle further down into streams of science, which can inevitably impact things like clinical and legal, scientific, and even policy decisions. And then there's this essential, what we call the reproducibility, that it is difficult enough for us to even establish data provenance in our research. People that do research can spend a tremendous amount of time establishing the provenance. Where does the data come from when I develop a model? Well, we ask the question now, well, where does the data come from when an AI has helped develop the model? How can you establish this provenance? Unlogged AI use makes methods harder to audit. But there are some positive cases. We know that AI is already an accelerator, and we heard a lot of really good examples of that. But it's not a substitution for a method. It can help with literature triage, code scaffolding, data cleaning, image text annotation, grant editing, and public translation. Many of our researchers here have a responsibility to reach out to the public, and this can be often very difficult, and large language models can help with this. The thing that I like to emphasize here is that when you're a researcher working in this environment, you spend your career learning this sort of very specialized piece of information. But the work that you do might be spending 90% of your time data cleaning. And what I would suggest is that what we want to do is to have people work at the top of their competence, not at the bottom of their competence. And AI can help bring people up so that they're always working at the top of their competence. The downside of this is that you lose the skills, those everyday skills that you have. So we always have to keep that in mind. The third domain that I'd like to touch on, which again was mentioned, is this connection between the university enterprise and the general public. And what I'd like to emphasize here is that public trust is a part of a university's operating capital. People trust people in universities. The general public trust people when they say things. But when a large language model says things that was when a large language model says something, and that large language model was actually something that a professor said, the general public doesn't know whether the large language model said that or whether the professor had said that. And I like to give this analogy about the failure modes that we currently have in society today, is that we have this responsibility to the general public from separating fiction from truth. We also have a responsibility for establishing a range of usefulness for all the tools that we can develop. And what I would argue is that there's very similar analogies between the way we thought radiation in the 1920s and the way that we look at AI today. Radiation was this incredibly powerful tool. You could get X-rays, you could treat cancer with it, but by the same token, people could die from overexposure. We did not understand at the time what the range of usefulness of this tool was, and what the dangers were, and where the benefits were. And I would argue that it's going to take us time before we can really understand what the range of usefulness of artificial intelligence is going to be. AI also gives the public more access and increases the expectations of the university enterprise. I'm not sure if you've come across this story, but it is really quite astounding. There was a data scientist who adopted a dog, and the dog was diagnosed with a rare form of lymphoma. The data scientist would then said, I can fix this problem, ramped up his AlphaFold technology, and came up with a customized agent to treat this dog's lymphoma. He then approached the university and said, here, this is what I need to cure my dog's cancer. And what does a university do with that information? because a hospital isn't really going to do this. Now, in this case, this was a dog. Because it was a dog, there were no, the medical legal implications of this were much lower than it was if you're human. A human could do this, right? A human could find out what sort of strange strain of lymphoma that they might have and walk up to a professor in a university and say, here is the proteins that I need to solve my cancer or to fix my cancer. How do we deal with that? Fortunately, he came across a chemist that was in the university, and they developed a treatment protocol, and the dog is surviving. So what they thought this dog was going to die in like 3 months or something, the dog is still alive today. The point here is that this is what AI is doing to the general public is it's changing the relationship it has with the university. We're going to be seeing this kind of thing a lot more often. And we have to be prepared for this. So the positive cases along this line is that, for the general public, even for the general public to understand what a university does can be very difficult. But AI can help lower the barrier of understanding. It can provide multilingual access, provide access to public-facing information, plain language explanations for the kinds of complex research that's conducted, better routing for people that are interested in actually going to the university, right? Create simple chatbots so people can interface with a simple chatbot to find information about university programs that are best suited for their interests. And faster responses to simple questions that typically take up HR resource time, a tremendous amount of their time. The fourth domain that I'd like to talk about is the university operations. And again, I think this is one of the more sort of less glamorous spaces where AI and the university intersects, but it is probably one of the most potentially high value return areas. And there's positives and negatives to this because in university administration, very small workflow tools can become high consequence infrastructure elements. One simple piece of paper that's transmitted from one desk to another can have profound impacts on the progress of a student, of whether that student is admitted or not admitted, for example. It can be very fragile. And so when we introduce AI in this domain, we have to be very mindful of the risks and the failure modes. What are those failure modes in general? Opaque triage. Sometimes people will develop an AI tool, but they don't understand where a decision was made, right? Automation bias is a big thing. If you're generally using large language models regularly, there is a tendency for people to think of it as an authoritative source of information, and so that can introduce bias. There's what's called surveillance creep, and I think that this is becoming more and more important, especially with the use and the rise of ambient technologies. If there's a microphone here and it's connected to Zoom, that's actually being transcribed and we'll probably ingest it to an AI algorithm that can synthesize all of our talks here today. And the consequences of this in the classroom and for business operations is quite profound. And then there's the general problem about the institutions of vendor lock-ins. So like a larger university like UFMG, you probably have very large contracts with companies like Microsoft, or maybe you have accounts with Anthropic. How much are you going to be locking your data sets to these institutions? And can you actually achieve provenance in decision-making, the provenance of decision-making, if you are locked in something and suddenly have to change a vendor? The point that I'm really trying to make here is that the dullest tools can create a durable institutional risk when it's embedded in a workflow. But there are many positive sides and positive cases here. Things like procurement. People that are involved in purchasing can ingest large amounts of information, digest it very quickly. In human resources, using large language models for what I call very low stakes work, things that are not going to impact specific students, but introduce sort of mundane kinds of work. In finances, using machine learning to sort of optimize budgets. Compliance, this is a tremendous thing. If you have a radiation safety program, for example, we probably have many labs throughout the university and complying them with all of the regulations can be a challenge. Student services, making things more efficient for students to access information, and leveraging large language models for triaging and advising. And scheduling. There's nothing worse in the world for me than someone sending me a doodle poll. I just hate it. So this is, things that we can leverage in our day-to-day lives from an HR perspective. I'll also add here that Cornell has authorized the use of Zoom AI tools for generating meeting notes. What's going to tie all these things together, and I think that your university is doing a tremendous job in doing this by having committee and all the work that you've been doing. What I would like to point out is that all of this really comes down to some kind of governance framework. Whether that's a sort of a policy or whether that's a group of people, the underlying thing here is that you have to have some kind of governance of this entire organization. And this is a little different from data governance. Data governance usually is in the realm of IT departments in terms of how data is exchanged, data in flight, data in rest, etc. What I'm talking about is AI governance in general, and how it affects all the different parts of the university. Governance is not a poster, it's a set of enforceable decisions. I think this is critical. And so we have to think carefully about these sort of several different domains when it comes to AI governance in our institutions. Think about where the data comes from, what are the classes of data, where they can be used, what are the specific use cases for the AI in your environment, what are the tools that you're going to use, whether they're licensed, whether they're commissioned, whether they're contractually safe to use. Who is the accountable person? Who is the person that is responsible for the output in that decision? And who's going to audit the performance of this, this model that you're using? What are the things that Cornell is doing in this regard? One of the sort of big things that we've done is that we've added a new vice provost. So this is there's the provost, which is really the big president, if you will, and then we have several vice provosts. And so we introduced a new vice provost of AI strategy. And so this is really a strong message to the entire community that we know that this is affecting all of our pillars. And so we have a person now, Torsten Joachims, who's a computing scientist, who's leading this effort. We've also really bolstered things along our teaching and innovation lab. So this is a separate institution. It's a resource available to all students and for professors who are lecturers teaching in classrooms, providing guidance for them of how to safely use AI in their courses, very similar to the kinds of things that your team is doing. And then there's, as I mentioned, an AI literacy foundational course that we have available now for all of our students. This is done in conjunction with our library and the Center for Teaching and Innovation. But I would argue that that's probably not enough. And then I think that each of the college has to look at their individual domains and think very carefully about their students and what they're exposed to when it comes to artificial intelligence. And ensure that the students are going to be prepared for the real world where AI is used, indiscriminately. There's a layer that the college can provide that the central policies just simply cannot. And here are some of the more important features here. And one of the things that I would like to highlight here is the data element. If you're a physician or in training, you have access to a lot of patient-specific information. If you're a veterinarian, you have a lot of access to owner information. Now, the requirements for data consideration for people that are in those training environments is dramatically different than the requirement for someone that's in chemistry and physics, right? And so we need to make sure that we have governance that is adoptable and adjustable to the different kinds of learning environments that students are facing. We also have, therefore, working on an additional AI primer for students in veterinary medicine. So you have a generative AI layer, everybody does that, and then based on your vocation, if you're a veterinarian, there's an additional layer of AI that you should be aware of. And these would focus on the kinds of day-to-day activities that students are performing, whether they're in the lab, whether they're in the classroom, or whether they're in the clinic. We also try to build opportunities for people to learn. So creating different environments where people can come into conferences, come into seminars, and dispense knowledge when it comes to AI that's specific to their field of study. And we've also created a number of what are called sandboxes. So this is probably something you probably have done, creating these safe, secure, and shareable within the university environments for generative AI models. And so this is one of the versions that we have that's available to everybody in the Cornell enterprise. Basically, you can access a variety of different large language models that you'd like, and you're assured that the data that you put in is secure. You don't have to worry about it being leaked out. Another, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to really zoom through this. When we're adopting a new technology, we follow the NIST guidelines for technology adoption, which really means first establishing a governance framework, mapping out the procedures, finding out what your use cases are, making sure you understand your context and the harms, and then measuring the performance of that tool, measuring bias, evaluating security, and then managing that tool. And I would say that the hardest part isn't really introducing a technology, it's managing it and monitoring its performance. This requires warm bodies. Here's my second last final slide, some basic general principles I think that are common throughout all of our colleges and even with our conversations that we had here today is that whenever we're using AI, whether you're a student or whether you're a professor, there should be meaningful disclosure. You need to verify information, legal, clinical, citation claims, whatever that is, you have to verify. And you have to think carefully about the data that you have, whether it's restricted, and whether you can use certain tools and ingest data in those models. And then you have to ensure that there is a person that's responsible for the outputs of this. And then monitoring deployment. Data drift is normal, it's expected, and so we need to always keep an eye on that. I'm going to skip these. These were some questions that I was going to pose to everyone. But here's my final slide. The university answer is not prohibition. It's disciplined adoption. And these are the 5 points that I had raised earlier for us to be thinking about when it comes to AI within the university environment in all of the 4 different domains that the university touches. Thank you very much. Obrigado. Here are some references for you.
Thank you, Dr. Parminder, for sharing your thoughts with us. Now we are going to have our round table, okay? So I invite you 3 to the table. And then you have the chance to make your questions, so please feel free to make them. Don't be shy. We can do it anyways. You can just raise your hands and speak in Portuguese or English. It doesn't matter. We just want your participation, okay? And also you can write down in a piece of paper your question and send me, or you can come here and speak in this microphone as well, okay? We have a first one there.
I think it's okay if I talk from here, right? Well, thank you for the presentations.
I don't know about the camera, if you need to speak in the microphone for the camera and for the record.
And thank you. Okay, I'll leave this microphone here, okay? So you can't come. I'll just send the paper with the question.
Okay, so thank you very much for the talks. I'm a professor here. I'm the head of the Ecology Graduate Program here in UFMG. And from everything you said, there is a word buzzing in my head. There is yet. Everything we know about AI is today, But if we look 1 year ago, we didn't predict what we had today, at least for the common user. For the academic writings and all the pitfalls and traps that you mentioned, how can we avoid the kind of siren songs pushing us to the easy path, thinking that we have grants to apply, we have papers, the students have 2 or 4 years to defend their thesis. So how to match the idea of the timetable that we have to achieve, the things that we have to accomplish in our career, and the pitfalls and traps of AI. Thank you very much.
This is a very difficult question. There's some of you may be familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, right? So this is the idea that something has this incredible impact and awareness with the community, and it reaches then eventually it reaches a plateau, and then there's level of, oh no, this isn't working very well, and then there's a pit of despair, and then there's the plateau of productivity. And I used to put up a slide that showed this curve and say, okay, where are we here? Where are we here? And what's happening, and I'm going to really just commiserate with you, is that we think we're kind of somewhere, and then boom, something happens, and then it's, oh, there's another hype cycle, and then boom, there's something else, and then you're on another hype cycle. And it made me think, because I'm a physicist, that maybe these are all just kind of convolutions of operations that are operating on each other, and that you're getting a sort of incredibly high demand of hype with no tangible benefits yet really demonstrated. And I think that because when we, as professors, our timelines for productivity are not done in the scope of days. That is not true for people working in computing science. If you're working in computing science and you build an amazing foundation model, it's out on GitHub tomorrow, and everybody is tackling and using it. But that's not the pace of science. So to answer your question, I don't know. I think what we will do is we will eventually find that there are many failures in the way that these tools are operating. And all I would recommend to people is to say, understand the tool that you're using, and if you trust the tool that you're using, then stick with that until you have trust in another tool. Because the work of a scientist is measured over the course of months to years to decades. And this is the timeline that we need to think about when we develop or introduce AI technologies into our day-to-day work. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that I was thinking about in relation to this is because sometimes we're faced with these challenges as individuals, but it's more of a systemic problem, right? And usually when we have, like Professor Parminder was presenting, I mean, many of the issues that we face with these technologies, they were already present. They're being catalyzed in a way. So the pressure of productivity or the lack of time to conduct research, and that's something that we've been facing with master's and PhD students here, with the lack of scholarships, and then having to reconcile other kind of job with research, and that's the kind of pressure that increases, right? So I think that it's hard to assert like a very precise antidote to that because it's very systemic. So, and one thing that I think this whole context brings us to reflect is how we can, from the symptoms that arise with this, how we can understand the problems that we already had with like assessment, for instance, evaluation in classroom contexts. I mean, the issues that we find now are actually like an exaggeration of what we already had with plagiarism, with copying from the internet, for your essay, or just paraphrasing your colleague's work. I mean, that's something that teaching, we find that all the time before. Now it's just much more easier. I mean, much easier to paraphrase someone else's work and just present it as yourself. So then we might think, well, is that evaluation even working? I mean, or is the timeline for that we're expecting students to comply with, is it really realistic? Because it's not that people want to do that. Sometimes they're just pressured to do that. So maybe we need to reevaluate, like Professor Ricardo was mentioned, the temporality of all that. And I think that's a very central aspect of what you're mentioning, I guess.
I don't know if all the three of us should be addressing all the questions, but if there are other questions, we will please. But just to be brief, and I completely agree with what has been said, and some of the elements that Professor Parminder brought in terms of deeper implications of the use of AI. When I'm discussing AI, I'm very frightful of the idea that you can understand AI as a tool that you can use in either direction, missing the point that it's actually affecting some of the structures of what we do. And so when you ask your question, how do we match the everyday demands with the risks and pitfalls related to that? And I think we tend to think about how to control the risks and pitfalls instead of looking at what are the demands. And I think that Professor Parminder, for instance, said several times, so is the article journal system working and useful for contemporary research, or are we facing the need to adapt the way we publish the outputs of our research? Is that and I think we are in Brazil facing significant change in the way that graduate programs are evaluated, in terms of how it has had an important impact in terms of the quantitative dimension and the qualification of this, but it's changing now in terms of the director of evaluation of copies to put more focus on the students and the quality, and not on the amount of papers published per year per scholar. So I think that for me, one of the central elements is to face the temporal demands of existence and of research, and what is needed in temporal terms to develop proper research in cancer that we were talking previously today. So I think to address your question, and I don't believe we don't have a response, and I wouldn't say that that's yet, but I think we should be looking at the demands, and we should be reconceiving of some of the universities' demands, and of science endeavor, broadly speaking, demands.
Hello, thanks for your wonderful lectures. I'm a professor at the medical school, and I'd like to hear from you, how do you have incorporating AI in your teaching routinely tasks in medical or your field of teaching? How do you have incorporating it for undergraduate students?
Thank you for the question. I can answer in relation to the veterinary student programs and how some professors are using AI. So one of the things I did not show was a sandbox area for faculty and staff to access. And so there's an interface that all of our faculty and staff have access to, which contain a variety of models that other professors have built. One, for example, is a tool on standardized radiology reports. So when a student, or when someone is reviewing an X-ray image, you have certain things that should be in the report, a standard. And so the trend is to make this into a very standardized format, as opposed to just random text.
And so this professor has built an agent that allows you to put in your initial assessment, and then from that generate a standardized report. And so students can evaluate the quality of their reports using this AI tool. And then in addition to that, there's another agent which does the opposite of this and says, can the average person understand what this report is saying? And so these are two sort of adversarial agents that some of our professors are using in their classrooms. Other examples include another set of agents for multiple choice question design. So when lecturers are developing course content and they want to build question sets for doing quizzes, we've created what are called RAG models, retrieval augmented generation models, where professors can upload all of their content and then from that use a large language model to generate question sets for their students. And then there's some of the applications that we're using for helping train students in the veterinary medicine program. And then we're also providing them access to public commercial software. So we do get licenses for commercial parties that will give us access to AI scribes, for example, so that they can get some practice understanding how these AI scribes are working in the real world. Because this is the generation that these students are going to see this in the real world. They need to know what these things look like in the classroom before they go out in the real world. Those are some of the examples we're seeing AI in the classroom for in veterinary medicine. I can't speak to what's happening at Weill Cornell, but there is a very large emphasis on keeping students. There is a course that the medical students take. They take a course on AI and generative AI competency and literacy. It is in the program itself, so that helps the students understand what the tools are, and they're seeing it in their day-to-day work now in most hospitals.
Hello, Adriano, professor of our College of Pharmacy. Especially our committee here that I'm knowing now. Do you have here in UFMG some action, and this kind of Professor Parminder told us, to develop some internal tools like Sandbox to our community to use, maybe in this RAG models training in an internal use. I don't know if you use there in Cornell the API from these three main companies, because they are very fast to develop one model. To the beginning is difficult. So here in UFMG we have some action to develop these internal tools, please.
So just deciding who addresses the question, sorry. Thank you, Adriano, for your question. There are some developments in specific directions, not of full developments of specific LLM model or something like that. But while I was listening to the presentations, I was thinking about an experience that is going on, for instance, in Fundep, that is training through the work of Professor Valmir Caminhas. They are training several internal models for the management of research and the resources and spotting possibilities of fraud in the public process through which you purchase things, but also developing models in order to recognize images in order to organize the archives of images that UFMG has for the past 100 years and Fundep's archives. And I have a personal individual dream of the development of a very simple chatbot that could help us navigate. I'm the head of department at the moment, but that could help us navigate some of the resolutions, documents, and procedures in order to engage with everyday demands and how to proceed in specific cases. So there are certain developments being underway, but not that I'm aware of the use of particular sandboxes, which has been prescribed by the Ministry of Education. So this is one of the ways forward that has been advocated for. But I'm not aware of any institutional developments on that direction, although probably in the Department of Computer Science they're working on models like that.
Can I add something? So the sandbox actually started out with an initiative through the Computing Science Department, and it evolved into a small AI strategic meeting team. And so what happened within that environment is that groups of computing science students would help sort of build this infrastructure. And then also with the Computing Science Department, we're able to connect with different professors on their specific kinds of problems. And it just grew and grew and grew. And from that, this idea of the sandbox was developed. So I'm not sure if that's an opportunity, is to really leverage the skills that already exist within the university, because they know how to do this.
Hi, I'm not a professor, just a student. But in one of the presentations, I guess was Professor mentioned the evaluation of competency. And for me, that have been studying for quite some time, studied back then in the 80s and now back many years later, one of the most interesting part of education is to provide the ability or to evolve, help the students to evolve the critical reasoning, our ability to think, to criticize. And the little I know about AI is that there are some strong critics about how much the use or the improper use of this new technology could compromise this ability in the middle and long terms of especially those young minds that are coming among this new era. So I am curious what UFMG is thinking about evaluating competency within the school, and to know if Cornell has any policy or anything already in place for that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think one thing that I would like to point out first, there's one thing that sometimes we say about improper use of technologies, and it's something that's, of course, we have to put in perspective, that when it comes to the big companies that are providing these technologies, I don't think that those uses would be considered improper to their approach, because they're actually marketing sometimes the very improper use that from our perspective we would say, right? I mean, that's something that, so many of the times we're actually resisting some of those marketed approaches, right? I mean, there's actually some interesting data on that. There was a New York Magazine article that was very popular some months ago or years ago, that showed actually how, you know, the timing actually of ChatGPT release, and how that, and also how user acquisition followed like the school year of the Northern Hemisphere. So that's something that's, I mean, that kind of use is actually very much in line with what they're trying to market sometimes. But when it comes to student evaluation, I think that's from the part of the committee, we've been working on these general guidelines, considering that there are different approaches for each field, right? So, in some areas, the actual critical study of AI itself is part of the topic, right? Sometimes it's more of a secondary adjacent tool that has to be approached in that specific context. So that varies a lot. But then there are some perspectives that we have seen, and then of course we might need more forums to discuss those experiences, right? Of different strategies to do assessments, like the ones that Professor Parminder was presenting. But we've seen also the rise of oral exams, for instance, right? Or some other kinds of like progressive evaluation. So it has to be something that has to be, I mean, it's becoming more understood as it's something that, because of the temporality of everything, right? I mean, it was a wave that came so fast that, and then how, all teaching practices, they're in need of adapting, and of course we don't move as fast as that deployment. So, but I think these experiences, they might need to be shared more often so we could understand them. But I think these are some of the experiences of oral examinations or more process-focused assessment that become interesting in ways of avoiding, because I don't know, in teaching, I think one of the things that annoy me the most is being in front of a paper of a student and have to be like, doubting if it's their work or not. I mean, it's many of the times I try to change the approach to avoid that moment. I mean, of trying to be, doubting the student, which becomes creates a distrust in this relationship, which I think is not productive of the teacher-student relationship. So, if I can in any way avoid this kind of suspicion, I think I try to move to those evaluation methods that avoid this kind of suspicion situation. So.
I'll be quick so that we can listen to you. I think there are two ways to respond to address your question. The first one is that we should be thinking of the changing competencies and what are the necessary competencies that should be evaluated. And some are the very classic ones like critical thinking and the possibility of developing knowledge. But I also think we should be considering what other competencies we should be looking at the moment. In terms of what UFMG is doing, so there's obviously the ongoing research in terms of techniques of evaluation going on the Faculty of Education, and there are many people there also looking at AI at the moment. And GIS, the Diretoria de Metodologias Ensino, has conducted 3 events so far in terms of how to think about forms of assessment and how to develop new forms of assessment. In terms of what I have been seeing of the university, there are all kinds of individual strategies that at least make us think about what can be helpful. So you have these very high-tech professors that are changing completely the way they evaluate. And I like to name one of them here, who is Wagner Meira, probably one of our top scholars in the Faculty of Computer Science. And he's saying, I no longer use computers in my assessments, and they're writing codes by hand with their phones in plastic bags underneath the seat. So that's Wagner's personal strategy, which for me was very different. So other strategies have been mentioned in terms of oral exams, but you also have a lot of people in economics and in Fafishi evaluating the capacity of students to establish dialogues with models and evaluating the conversations and the amount of knowledge that students are inputting in these conversations. I've also seen a couple of cases of people that ask in the very first days of a course or a discipline, or in the content of an exam, for a specific model to respond to the question, and then asks the students to address critically that response on the light of what they have learned and studied, and ask students to engage with these responses and and I'm also thinking, when we're talking about assessment of competencies, we tend to think about exams for undergrads mostly. But there is one discussion that is really important in terms of thesis and dissertations. And a lot of people are claiming for defenses to be more meaningful again, especially that the defense is a time that knowledge can be further developed, tested, and that you can actually put more weight on that specific moment in terms of how you develop the assessment in itself of the product. There are also, and I think Professor Parminder, and I'll leave it here, has talked about that, also attempts to ask the person being assessed not to deliver only the final product, but the steps, the coding process, the failed attempts, in order to analyze the trajectory instead of the one specific output. So yeah, so there are many attempts underway.
I really can't add much more to this in the context of what happens within the university, but I do want to highlight another important domain of competency. The reason that the students are enrolled into programs is to perform functions outside of the university typically, or maybe they go back into university. And so there's a level of competency that they have to have in their job, whether they're a physician, or whether they're a veterinarian, or whether they're an engineer. And there's an important layer of competency assessment that is achieved through professional organizations as well. And I think our professional organizations are also struggling with how they are assessing competency. And there's been a shift, certainly what I've seen is a lot more of a shift towards oral examinations for many of these competency assessments. Because at the end of the day, students are going to do what they need to do to get through a program. And then once they're out in the real world, they're going to be faced with real world challenges. And many of those real world challenges will require them to use AI to solve their problems. So how do we ensure that what the decision making that is made is that these people can, that these students, when they're in the real world, can make good quality decisions and be safe in their in the activities that they do. And the general guidance that I give students when I give a lecture on AI 101 is the following. I say, if you're going to use AI in your day-to-day work, then you have to understand what it's doing, and you have to know the data and all these kinds of things that I mentioned about. But in addition to that, if you can't explain the AI that you use to the person that you're using it with, like if it's a patient, or whether it's the owner of the animal, if you can't understand and explain what the AI is to that person, you shouldn't be using it, right? If you can't understand what the AI system is doing in the first place, you really should not be using an unknown, potentially unsafe technology. So I can't really answer your question, but what I can say is that there are more layers to competency in people in the real world, and we have to think of it is not only at the professional level, but also in the continuous learning, lifelong learning component too. You know, I was a medical physicist for 25 years, and 80% of my work could be done with a good foundation model, right? And so why don't I just do that? I still have to maintain my competency in my field. So this is another dimension to explore.
Hello, thank
thank you for your presentation. It was really nice. I'm delightful to hear you giving this information about AI, and it was really impressive. So I just started my professional career, let's say that. I work here in the hospital, veterinary hospital, and then I'm very worried about how AI can affect my work as a vet in the practical daily life. So you, sir, as a physician, what you think about what's the most extreme good use of AI in our daily life? How we can use this without without damaging my competence as a vet? How do you think we can use that? I'm sorry if that's two specific questions, but thank you.
That's a tough question.
This one is for you.
So I'm a physicist, not a veterinarian, so I can't answer, but I can give you some perspective, I suppose. I think that we all have wonderful visions of what AI can be in our day-to-day life, in that it can help us find problems in people and animals that would be really difficult for us to find. And I think that if we think of AI as being a collaborator, where it can give ideas but not necessarily do the things for us, I think that would be a good area. There's a really great book by Frank Pasquale. It's called the New Laws of Robotics. I don't know if you've read that, but in that book, he talks a lot about the influence of AI and robotics on humanity. And his general thesis at the end of all of this, and this is a pretty dated book, was just that we need to develop a healthy relationship with the AI tools that we have that make us more productive in our day-to-day lives without losing our critical skills and eroding our skills. This is a difficult thing to do. But you can imagine an environment where you have something along the lines of an assistant to help you bounce ideas off of you, with each other to actually learn more about, your patient or whatever problem it is. That's the dream, I think, of what a positive, healthy relationship with AI could be for many professionals in their working career. I think there is the other side of this too, in that all of the knowledge is amortized through a large language model, and that you become effectively the hands or the slaves to do the work itself, right? The AI is telling a human what they should be doing, and that is not a healthy relationship. And so this is I think this is why we need social scientists heavily involved in this conversation. And what is this new relationship going to look like for all of us on this planet, with AI becoming more powerful, foundation models becoming more powerful in our day-to-day lives? What is the future of work going to look like? And I would hope that it is a good, that is a mutual relationship, that you have a good, positive relationship with a tool, and that the tools are versatile, and that you have the option to choose the different tools that you have, right? Because some tools may be, limiting in a certain environment, and some tools may be more open access that allow you to incorporate information and data. So that's the vision that I would have, and that's what I would hope to see.
Well, about data, the thing that is that when we're using a commercial proprietary tool, we cannot guarantee that it's not going to be used. I mean, it is going to be used. You can't guarantee that it's incorporated. But there's one thing that we're talking about this often, and that's not only about AI. I mean, when you put your files on Google Drive, it might also be used. I mean, there is, when it comes to data protection, there is, I mean, yeah, I mean, it was already the case before, right? I mean, it's, so that's not only the case for AI. So one thing is about data protection, and then on general proprietary commercial tools, it's always going to be the case. There are, of course, ways to run models. They're not going to be so powerful, but you can run them locally. We don't have a sandbox institutional framework like they have in Cornell that we could guarantee that, but you can run on a single computer. Of course, it's not going to be so useful, perhaps, but that's possible. And then when you're using a local model, of course, then you can be sure of that because you can actually turn off the internet and continue working, so it's local. When it comes to academic integrity, that's something, I mean, about using for creating illustrations, or that changes a lot from field to field. I mean, when you go to, I used to teach also in the fine arts school, and there's a huge discussion among students mainly about the use of AI to produce images. I mean, especially because of how that creates asymmetries and problems for labor things, right? I mean, labor concerns. But in different fields, you're going to have different approaches to how much that is acceptable or not. So you really have to, you know, I mean, if you're a postgraduate student, you really should talk to your supervisor and to your program and really to see how that debate is playing out in that particular context, because that changes a lot. When it comes, for instance, to develop illustrations or graphs. And also that also applies to how much of the text you can really improve through text generation in that sense. I mean, one thing is to, because I've seen from, you know, correcting text or translating text, which is one thing, right? To people actually just giving like bullet points and ask the model to generate like the full text, which is of course very different levels of use, right?
Can I add something to this question? I love this kind of more practical question because it shows the uncertainty and the heterogeneous environment we live in. So, of course, the models and how they work, it is almost a black box, and it's very difficult to understand, like, the background of all the models. And this, of course, has a consequence in the use of the models. So I was sure that that kind of question would came up here. And just adding something related to that, I would like to know how is the conversation or the interaction with you guys from UFMG AI Committee with the graduate programs? Because we hear this all the time from the students, you know, all the time. What should I do? What should I not do? And I think the most important word here is transparency, maybe. And we are not seeing, we have not seen this. So, like, for example, we should ask for them, for students or even professors, like some journals are doing now, like transparency, use term, or, you know. So at least in my program there is no guideline for that. So, yeah, I understand you completely. So the question is, how is the interaction of the committee with the graduate programs to deliver such guideline, and what are your feelings about the concerning of the graduate programs? Are they too passive? Are they waiting for you to send them some guidelines? Because I'm not seeing any discussion, at least in our unit, to that. And that's why you have this this event here today. So, please.
Okay, and so I'll try to address some of the points. And so first, and I'm sorry, what's your name? Paula. So Paula, yes, there is so the new set of guidelines has been written, and it's the attempted date is the 13th of August, in the beginning of the second semester. So the Chancellor has scheduled that he would like to have these new, more specific guidelines by the 13th of August at our campus, and on the 24th of August in Montes Claros. So that's the framework we're working with. And this is the institutional response, very specific. Then I'll also add some points on Andrea, and I'll try to be quick and some individual points, but many things here. But first I'll address the more institutional questions then. In regard to the programs, so we have organized the seminar series last year that we had one event per month that was announced through the community, and in some of them we have a lot more people with more graduate programs and coordinators. There was a big meeting in the Chancellor building with some of the graduate programs. And there are also these invitations to talk specifically with groups of either faculty members or graduate programs. So it has happened in the medical school, it has happened in the School of Economics, it has happened in pharmacy a couple of times. So it happens like this, and I think that it depends on faculty members that are concerned about. Usually there's someone really concerned that has experienced something really bad that is actually triggered by this need to discuss and talk, and these events happen. And so that's why I'm thankful to Rafael as well, because he said we haven't had any discussions and it would be wonderful to have. So I agree. In terms of, but I do think there's one more institutional point here. But I do think, and there is a difficulty of the broader frame to deal with this issue, that graduate programs should be active. So one of the dimensions that we discussed in the beginning of the committee is that the committee is in no condition to substitute either the ethical committee, because we have an ethical committee that should be dealing with these issues and that should be evaluating the cases. And the AI committee should not replace the ethical committee that is looking at broader elements. And also the graduate programs that have their own colegiados that are supposed to deal with the specific cases. So we are working on recommendations, discussions, critical thinking, but there are these institutional bodies that should be dealing, and some of the units are doing. So for instance, the Faculdade de Letras has its own committee dealing with their own specific cases, and that's the CEDEPLAR is also thinking about having their own committee to develop specific guidelines for that specific area. Because this leads me to the second point, and I think Andrea has already touched that point. But when we talk to different fields, people have very different concerns, and what they find to be unacceptable is really different. So for instance, talking to people in biology, when you mentioned, so is it okay to send my data and ask for illustrations? If you talk to people in biology, at least that's what they've told me, that's unacceptable, because the images are the proof that you're going to use for your journal articles. And if you produce image through AI, that's unacceptable. While in social sciences, if you're trying to produce an image that illustrates something, and we recognize it may not be a big issue. So the amount of writing or of translation, so it depends, and I don't know which area you are in, but for people in language studies, translation is a big issue and a big dimension of what their role. While for me, for instance, I have been translating but revising small fragments that I wouldn't used to do before, and I think I'm actually losing this competence. But I've been using more to translate small fragments of citations and then to revise. So one of the difficulties of what you can do and what you cannot do, what are the musts of an institution, is the variety of fields and areas that have different requirements of coding, of writing. And in humanities, writing means something very different than in computer science, for instance. So this is one of the elements. My own personal response, and I'll conclude here and finish, is that it's a way I found to make my conscience feel more calm and at ease, would be, what would you be able to acknowledge that has been outsourced without feeling any sort of feeling of shame? So you can acknowledge the possibility of having a revision of fragments, being careful in terms of which system you're using, how much you provide. I, for instance, have never provided whole articles, but some people are doing that to have like reviewers. Act as reviewer 1, act as reviewer 2, and give me feedback. But so my own personal strategy is, what would I feel shame to outsource, and what would I be able to recognize that has been outsourced? So that's my, and to conclude, I said I would conclude, but one last case. And one of the difficulties also of saying do that, don't do that, and the university asks you to do that, is because, not only because different fields are different, but because different journals have different strategies and policies, and you should be aware of that. So one case that has been told by a journal editor to me is of one author that has hired a person to revise their article. And the reviser used an AI system. And then the journal itself claimed that that was not original work that has been written through AI. So you have all these layers of, and I think Parminder pointed to one of the most difficult things. How do you organize the chains of responsibility and accountability when these things happen? And so I'm sorry to bring these news. So there are a lot of people working, thinking, but I always feel frustrated because there's a lot of uncertainty, and very strict guidelines can also lead to new problems. So yeah, sorry to share my frustrations as well. And I'll stop here.
Can I add something? Can I? Okay. I think this could be a small device. So you should think like AI tools as just tools. The responsibility is still yours, So use them as tools. Of course, if you use, for example, for grammatical correction, you have to review it. So, because the responsibility is yours. So when you have some doubt on the use of this kind of tools, try always to rely on ethics and responsibility. Okay, so there is expression for that, so we always try to keep the human in the loop. Don't use the AI to substitute you. Don't allow them to do that, okay? It's your responsibility. That's it, I think. Sorry. What do you do to construct your own images,
This is a very context-specific answer. There is no right or wrong answer that you can apply across the entire university, and this is why I think it's important for each of the colleges and local areas to understand, because they understand the culture of their community. They know the graduate students and the kinds of backgrounds that they have. So I think that I can't answer that question. It really depends on where you are. If you're a computing scientist, you're using AI to generate figures all the time, right? But if you are a biologist, you do that, that is sacrilegious. Like, you should never do that, right? One thing that I was going to add to this conversation was that one of the things that Cornell has done and our college has done is tackle the general problem of communication. Because the more people understand the technology, the less scared they are about it. And I think that many of us are in this time when we are feeling, oh no, this is happening, oh no, this is happening, oh no, this is happening. And I think if we as an institution are open about the fact that yes, we are afraid too, but we are developing something, and that we have regular communication between, with everyone about where we are, that is very helpful. One of the things that with our AI steering group and our college is doing is building very simple one-page reference notes that we can give to everyone. So I'm showing one here, a very simple page that says, what are the tools that you can and cannot use? We in Cornell, we can use Copilot. We can use it to summarize. Here's the link. We can use our dashboard. Here's the link. You can use Adobe Firefly. We have an institute. You can create figures. That's fine. You can collect notes from Zoom. We give them links to the AR governance documents. Where can I find the governance? Where can I find information about data? Because many of these things are already there from IT departments. They already have established things like what is high risk, what is medium, what is low risk data, and defining those for individual colleges. Link so that people can find out that information. We have another little simple section on using AI at work for students, or what you can do and what you can't do, or what you must do. And links to resources for teachers and for students. Telling very simple things like setting clear expectations, AI awareness and assessment designs, model responsible, or being responsible for AI outputs. And then for students, follow the rules, ask instructors when they're unsure in their use of AI, validate any AI-generated output, disclose the use of it, and then link to the academic integrity policy, the ethics. Like, so the students know that, oh, this is not, I still have to abide by the ethical rules, right? And the key principle we put in here is that AI should enhance learning, not replace it. And that students, including graduate students, are responsible for all of their work. So doing things like this is helpful. The other thing that we're doing regularly is every month we have what are called AI exchange meetings. And this is, I go around talking to different professors and say, you have to spend 15 minutes giving a talk about how you're using AI. Whether you're an administrative assistant, whether you're a professor, or whether you're a graduate student, or whether you're the IT guy. And you're gonna just show us 15 minutes what you're doing. And then I'm gonna record those, and everybody can watch those things. And so for 2 15-minute sessions, we have these little showcases. And then someone in our team can say, oh, by the way, we have this new data management policy that's been updated. And then for another 15 minutes, we say, what questions do you have? What can we do, right? And we've been doing this now for about 8 months. Every month we have this meeting. Many people attend online. People can access things online. But the key point here is that the more we talk to our community and the more that we share about our experiences and learn from each other, the more that we understand what is good and what is unsafe uses of AI. And this is how we're going to actually bring everyone together. I think that one thing that was mentioned earlier is that there's basically kind of 2 groups of people when it comes to AI. People that are afraid of it and don't want to touch it, and then there's people that are using it irresponsibly. And what we want to do is bring them together, right? So how do we do that? By constantly messaging and keeping people engaged, sharing stories, sharing updates about procedures and practices, and building a community so that we're all learning together. That's what we're trying to do.
If I may add just one point, and yes, completely agree. I would just suggest a couple of things and make one invitation here. Because I think our approach is very similar in terms of keep the conversation going with different. So please pay attention to the invitations of the monthly seminars, because what we're trying to do is bring scholars from UFMG, from different fields. So we have had people from geology, from medicine, from the School of Arts to discuss these, and then the invitation now. So there are some focus groups that are going to be conducted in the 2nd semester with students, undergrad, masters, and PhD students, and also faculty members from different units. So if you're interested, I can share the invitation, maybe with the list of people registered. Some of them are going to be conducted from starting on July. So it's also an opportunity to keep this conversation going and to think collectively through this issue. So
thank you so much, Ricardo. I have all the emails so we can share with them.
Thank you.
So I think it's time for us to close the event. What do you think? Let's say thank you again for all the 3 speakers. You're incredible. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here, okay? And yeah, see you soon. Best regards.